Boom. All right. Officially welcome into our profitable hiring workshop. I want to know if you're watching on here live, will you type in the chat, what kind of business do you run? Just so that I know kind of where you're at, what you're doing. And I would love to know, how many current employees do you have that work with you? Cool. How many current employees and what kind of business do you run? And then we'll get into some specifics today in terms of what to look at next. Great. So we got AP coming in with a healthcare business with 12 employees. I know Simona, you've got what, 4 now? Yep, 4 from the PR agency. We work with Simona directly, so I have the inside scoop. Let's see who else. Real estate, 5 for Lindsay, very cool. And mobile therapy practice with 16, awesome. Event production company, 5 core employees, 25 specialists is needed. Great. Okay, so as you can see, our business types range across the board, and yet the same principles apply no matter what your business is, because at the end of the day, profitability still has to happen within the business. And so as we're diving into this today, let's hit go on this and let's make this big for everyone. So we're going to be talking about how do we make sure that we can grow the company profitably through hires that make sense. So this is really what we're going to cover. How to avoid the biggest profitability mistakes as you're hiring, and kind of to see, well, what is it that I can maybe learn from someone else and what they were doing to avoid their mistake. We'll move my face over here so I'm out of the way. 3 big concepts today: what to hire, when to hire, and how to hire. And I've just heard this way too many times from way too many business owners. I grew my business so fast that now I can hardly afford to pay myself. We had someone who came in and they had been growing very rapidly, expanded 2 locations in a healthcare practice. They had, I think, 6 nearly full-time or close to it practitioners working for them. And they said, none of my employees know this, but I have to work PRN or kind of on the side gigs every weekend just to be able to pay myself, because I can't from the 2 clinics. And it was like, oh my goodness, it's terrible. Or this one, I have so much revenue coming in, but I don't know where it's all going. It's like I've grown and I've scaled, but the expenses have just gotten out of hand and I'm no longer profitable. And hiring tends to be a key linchpin in this. This is really sad to hear, but often very much the case for owners coming into us. I'm the lowest paid employee in my business, and you don't want to be that owner. Can we all agree with that? We do not want to be that owner. So instead, we want to be like these people. We had a gal who came in and was able to turn around her profitability. Where at the end of the year in December, they had so much cash left over that they got to have the fun problem of, how do we manage it all? And what do we do from a tax standpoint? So they got to buy themselves a car. Or someone else who came in and they had never previously been paying themselves because they didn't understand the profit margins in their business and how much they could afford to pay people. And as we got things turned around, it became very clear they could afford a 6-figure salary. Another client grew from being a solopreneur to having 5, and now they're up to, I think, 8 team members and highly profitable. And now they're able to pay not only themselves well, but their team gets year-end bonuses. Or last, this one was one of my favorites. Someone who was so nervous about paying themselves out. I don't know if you are one of those. There's 4 kind of profit archetypes, and one of them is the guardian, who just likes to hold on to cash and doesn't like taking it out of the bank and putting it in their personal bank account. But this client was able to take out a $15,000 bonus when I told them that they could do a 30, but it was like, oh, I'm only going to do 15. It's like, okay, that's not too bad. So real quick version of who we are, and my face is covering half of Will's, but we are CEO Finance Academy. Both Will and I there on the left are co-founders. We're actually former physical therapists. So if you're a healthcare provider, you're in here, we have lived that life. And we grew a business helping people market and sell better in their own businesses. We got really good at helping people make money. Been in this game for about 6 years. And we started seeing a trend years ago that it didn't matter how much people made. If they couldn't manage the money well, they couldn't keep it. So we thought, why would we focus on helping people earn more if they can't keep any of it? And so CEO Finance Academy was born. And we have a team of, there's 6 of us now, and we're making 3 hires this month. And we've added some amazing people to our team. Scott, who heads up our sales department, actually built and sold a $3 million business a few years ago, knows this stuff as a business owner. Sahira, our profit coach, grew and sold a $12 million a year dental practice, and now coaches for us. And so we're going to talk about principles today of profitable hiring. And why are we going to focus on principles? Because y'all have different business models. And we start to see examples of people in other businesses and think that doesn't apply to me because I have X, Y, and Z. Instead, we're going to focus on principles. And the biggest one that we're going to talk about today is called the profit valley. So I want you to imagine a graph of your time in business versus your profit in business. And I want you to think about where on this graph are you? So phase one of an early business is usually where the owner is doing almost everything themselves. And actually their profit margins may tend to be the highest in this early phase until we get to later on, where the profit that they're actually taking home looks great, but they have no time. And so an early stage, but one where people start to hit a very hard cap and they feel like I can't do anything else, so I need to hire, rightfully so. If they don't do it right though, then we get into problems. And so at this stage, a lot of times we're really needing to focus on what is the offer, what's your marketing, and what does your sales pipeline look like in order to get to this point. But we don't want to stay there. And we certainly don't want to get into this phase two. So we're going to look at how we avoid this. This is often what happens. Someone gets a business, they learn how to market, they learn how to sell, they're seeing patients, they're selling products, whatever it is. And then they say, I need help. And so we go and we hire and we scale and we get all these expensive new things. And sometimes we're getting into debt, and all of a sudden we find ourselves at this spot where now I still might not have, my time freedom. I'm further into business from a year's standpoint, but my profit might be as low as it's ever been. And sometimes we actually dip below the profitability line and go net negative. That's phase two. We see a lot of people who are in phase two, but the problems here to solve are, we've had to offload a lot of admin help. We're starting to offload delivery and we're increasing our capacity. And it's almost like we've built a hotel and we've built this gigantic hotel, but we only have like 5 people a night coming in. It's like, well, this hotel is great, but we got to go fill up the 100 rooms, right? So then we get into phase 3, and this is where all the fun stuff happens. And what our job is either to help people come out of that profit valley, or even better, skate through it and just jump right across it. Or we actually find people who are up here or on the ascension, but they aren't used to dealing with having that much profit and how to make sure that they can handle it. So the problems to solve here are really mastering your numbers, increasing your demand to make sure that it's meeting capacity, and then doing what we call cutting the bloat, where we're decreasing all of these extra expenses that we thought we needed right here to be real business owners, and making sure that we're staying lean. All right, so let's get into how do we actually avoid going into this profit valley. Tokes, welcome in, my man. So it really comes down to load balance. And what do I mean by load balance? Well, to avoid this profit valley, we need to solve the right problem in our business at the right time. And number 3, profitably. We see a lot of people solving future problems. So it might be the right problem, but it might be something that's going to happen in the future. And they're certainly not doing it profitably. And so how do we do that? Well, first, we have to understand what the flow of our business looks like and where our next bottleneck is. So I want you to look at this and think about, for your business, where do you think the bottleneck is right now? There's always one. There's one bottleneck. There's a really good book called The Goal by a guy named Eli Goldratt that if you're a real nerd like me, you might really enjoy this book. It's all about business efficiency and how do we get the most flow through, AKA profit, in our business. And there's 3 core areas and a couple of other ones where this can happen, but we either have a marketing bottleneck, a sales bottleneck, a delivery bottleneck, or as we grow, it might be an admin one. But you can see here that if we have a marketing bottleneck where we have a squeeze in our flow, well, then that is what's going to be limiting the business. Let's say though, that now we unleash that, we finally have a ton of leads, but we don't have the sales capacity to be able to handle those leads or the efficiency or the systems to do that well. Well, now we're constrained by, or limited most by, our sales process. So you might be in this boat if you feel like, yeah, I have tons of people all the time coming in, but I'm not converting as many as I should. You might have a delivery bottleneck where now we're making plenty of sales and, I've built a hotel that has 50 rooms, but I've got a wait list for the next 3 months. We see that a lot in healthcare practices where we've got solo providers or not enough providers, and they're constrained by how many rooms they've got available. Or you might have an admin bottleneck where it's like, hey, you've got to learn how to really lead people at that point. So the question is, when is the right time to solve that bottleneck or to hire to solve that problem? Well, it's before you really have a problem. So if we can have foresight into our business and say, well, I'm going to open up my marketing, and we have businesses come to us and say, I need more leads. It's like, well, you're at capacity and you have a wait list. Why do you think that marketing is the problem? That's totally not, right? Or they might be at capacity, but they don't have a wait list. Like, I need to market and get a wait list stuff. It's like, well, what if we focused on increasing our delivery capacity so that then we could go open up our marketing? And so getting a real handle on what your next bottleneck is so important. I would love to know, what do you feel like your bottleneck is right now in the business? Do you have a marketing bottleneck where you need more leads? Do you have a sales bottleneck where you've got plenty of leads, we just can't get through them all efficiently enough, or can't put out proposals quickly enough, or aren't converting people efficiently enough? Or do you have a delivery bottleneck where it's like, yeah, I've got all the people to serve and I've got lots of demand, but I can't serve anymore? Or is it an administrative one? Will you just put it in the chat? Which one do you feel like you're dealing with right now? Marketing, sales, delivery, or admin? And I'll tell you that the speed at which you grow in your business is determined most by your ability to identify and quickly solve the next bottleneck in your business. That is what determines the speed at which you grow. It's how well can I determine my bottleneck and then go solve it. That's why we feel like what we do in CEO Finance Academy is so important, because we get a real handle on the numbers so we can see, where is my bottleneck? All right, so we've got quite a few in marketing. We've got marketing, we've got some with an admin bottleneck, most in marketing, one in sales. Cool. I'll just tell you right now, in our business, we have a ridiculous amount of leads, which is a great problem. And we figured out over the past month that we have a sales bottleneck. And so as I went through and I ran the numbers, as we make our next hire that we're making right now, it will take this business to probably 3 times the revenue that we currently have, simply because we've got a sales bottleneck that we didn't quite realize. And we didn't realize it because I hadn't asked the right questions of our sales team. And when I asked the right question, we got the right answer. It's like, oh, you don't have the time to follow up. Oh, you don't have the bandwidth. Oh, even though your calendar looks like it might have space, we've got other stuff that we're doing. Okay, we can either solve that bottleneck by making our team more efficient, by giving them better processes, better tools, or we can hire additional capacity. All right. So we're going to talk about the 80% rule and when to hire. This is one of my favorite things that we do with clients, period, is this capacity versus demand mapping. So I want you to imagine, if you run a healthcare practice, you have a certain capacity for how many patients you could serve. If you run an event business, you have a certain capacity for how many events you can run based on your event managers or event planners. If you have a PR agency, you have a limit to how many companies your firm could work with based on your employees, right? If you got a mobile therapy business, you're limited by how many spots in the day you have, or if you've got 16 employees, by how many spots they have. So we all have a theoretical capacity. That's how many people could we serve total in a given time right now. So let's call it, for the sake of this, let's call it 100 visits per week, okay? If I'm a healthcare practice. If I'm an event planning business, it's 5 events per week. If I'm a PR agency, it's 16 clients, right? Whatever that capacity is. And then we have a demand curve. This capacity curve stays relatively the same unless we change our processes or our team, right? But the demand curve changes, and it changes quite a bit. It changes based on some seasonality, I'm sure, in your event business. It might change on economic differences that are happening in a business like a PR agency. In a healthcare business, it might be, I'm sure, when COVID hit and we all had to go shut down things, like, oh, okay, yeah, demand went way down. But it might be most directly related to either your marketing efforts, for scaling up marketing, or maybe we're growing word of mouth and we're dialing things in there. Generally, and this is simplifying it, but generally we'll have some kind of demand where the demand starts relatively low and we start growing, right? Here's the problem. If we wait to hire, or we wait to increase our capacity until we are at 100% capacity, it becomes really hard to hire. Like, have y'all gotten to the point, and maybe Tokes, when you were sitting in the dentist chair, or sitting over patients, is like, I've got a completely full schedule. Is it easy to hire when you have a completely full schedule? right? All our
It's almost impossible. It feels impossible. Yeah.
terrible, right? Not only do you have to go find someone and interview them, but then you have to ramp them up. You have to create trainings, all this stuff. Like that is a terrible time to hire. So instead, we go by what we call the 80% rule, which is at about 80% capacity. That's when I'm preparing to make my next hire. It's when I'm actually starting my next hire. So how do I do this in a business where I have multiple employees? It's really easy when you're in a solo provider role. But for a business that has multiple employees, I'm going to look at total employee capacity. And I'm going to say, Jenny could see 10 visits. This is her capacity. Her current demand is 5. Let's say Jim could see, I don't know, let's just call it 10 for easy numbers, and he's at 7. And Tony could see, I don't know, 15, and he's at 15. Well, I would look at this and I would see my total capacity. My total capacity is 10, and 10 is 20, plus 15 is 35. My demand is 5 and 7 is 12, plus 15. Don't make me do that math. 37. Nope, wrong math. See, I shouldn't have. This is why I have calculators that do this for me. 5 and 5 is 10, and 7, 17, 27. There we go. So my demand right now is 27 patients or 27 visits per week or events per week, whatever. But my capacity is 35, right? So I would see, where is my capacity at? I'm not quite at 80%. I need to go focus on filling up some of Jen's calendar and Jim's before I'm making my next hire. So in that case, I might have a marketing or a sales bottleneck, right? That might be the constraint. But then as I'm looking at it, and it's like, wow, I'm at 80% capacity. And the key here is, and I'm filling it up, then I need to hire. If I am at 80% capacity, but my demand has flatlined, or if I'm not quite at 80% capacity and I've flatlined, then I have a problem, right? Because then I have a marketing or a sales or an acquisition bottleneck. I need to go figure out how I can consistently acquire more people before I'm hiring, right? So understand the bottleneck. And if we know that, yeah, I'm starting to approach that 80% mark, it might be 75, it might be 90 based on your business, but we want to have that in mind. All right. We've got 10 minutes and way more to cover than I want. You cool if we go like 3 minutes over, y'all? Plan this for a half hour, but we might go a little deeper. All right. And AP says it depends on how well delegation has already been created. Yeah, exactly, for that hiring, right? So there's 2 types of leverage that we ultimately get through hiring, right? Or 2 types of hires that we're ultimately making. I'm either hiring to buy back my time, or I'm hiring for profit. Those are the 2. I'm either buying back my time, or I'm hiring because there's profit there. Meaning I can pay for someone's time and get a bigger return. So let's look at both of these for a minute. If I'm hiring for time, then we have to ask, what is the value of my time in the business? And there's a lot of ways to look at this. I'll just tell you the simplest that I like to look at for hiring time is, how much revenue do I have per month? And I divide that by how many hours per month I work. Now, I know you're like, well, Alex, I've got other people working in the business. I know, but what's the value of your time with the system, the machine that you've created versus how many hours you work? What's the value of that? So it might be something like $60 an hour. If we're doing really well, maybe it's something like $250 an hour. Who knows? But we look at this and we say, okay, cool. If I know that every hour in my business is producing ultimately X amount of revenue, then can I hire something off at $20 an hour and make it worth my time? Yeah, very probably. If I'm at a spot where I am not profitable, because I get that this isn't profit, if I'm at a spot where I'm not profitable, then I might have to look at profit per month divided by my time and see where I'm at, right? Or if I'm at a spot where it's like, I am so full and I can't see the forest through the weeds, a lot of times the reasons that we're not profitable is because we don't have time to actually work on the business, right? And we're just working in it all the time. And so we have found great success in hiring very skilled people at very reasonable rates who might not necessarily be based in the United States. And that's been something that we have used in our business. And so if you're looking for administrative work, I would just look, for example, at what might someone be able to do if they're taking over, I don't know, video editing for me for some marketing. Or what if they can take over X, Y, or Z thing. We'll look at that in just a minute. For example, though, one of our favorite sites in the world is Upwork.com, where you can go find very skilled people at very reasonable rates to do $10 an hour jobs that you're spending your $60 an hour time on, when we could hire it off for $10 an hour. That's how we start to create leverage. So let's look at this. What do I spend my time on? So we have to ask ourselves this question. What is my low dollar per hour stuff? And what is my high dollar per hour stuff that I spend my time on? And so I would make a list. I want you guys to throw out a couple of things here real quick. Will you just tell me a few things that you spend your time on right now? You can just unmute or you can type it in the chat. A few things that you spend your time on in the business that you know are relatively low dollar per hour tasks. Could be low value tasks. It could be low profit tasks, low email. Great. There's a really great book called Buy Back Your Time by a guy named Dan Martell that talks all about this, by the way. Scheduling and coordinating crew. Okay. Team highs is team training. Yeah. Right. Leadership. Team training, scheduling and coordinating. Right. There's all sorts of things that you're doing. I'm going to put, for a lot of you, it might be website maintenance, right? Like actually putting up a blog post or something, or it might be that you're doing your own scheduling, right? There's like you're doing your own calendaring, social media, fixing dental equipment, right? Okay, now I want you to look at what do you do on the high profit side of your business, right? So we've already said team training. What are the higher leverage or higher dollar per hour things that you do? For us, it might be one-on-one client work. For me, it's definitely creating trainings and spreadsheets and templates. It's creating systems around how we deliver. It's creating systems around how we sell. It's creating systems around for the administrative stuff, the financial stuff. Cool. So think about, what do I spend a lot of time on that is high value stuff? And the question that we really just have to ask is, how can I trade my low dollar per hour tasks off to someone else so that I can go do more high dollar per hour tasks, period, right? How can I hire these so that I can do more of these? Creating leverage. Now, we might not be directly creating profit from this in a super short amount of time, but we know that we want to get ourselves out of doing the low value tasks and into our highest zone of leverage, right? So then if we follow this, now there's a second type of hiring, which is hiring for profit. And there's 3 numbers to know, very simply. So for all of you who are thinking about, should I hire another therapist? What can I afford? Can I hire someone else in my PR agency? Can I hire another dentist? Can I hire another event coordinator? I just want you to look at really simply. What will I spend on this person? What will I make? And what will I keep? Right? 3 really simple ones. So what will I spend? Well, there's wages. If they're an employee, there's taxes. And there's some other additional overhead and benefits probably to hire them. So tally that up. Here's a total cost, right? How much am I going to spend on this person? What will I make? Well, how many additional clients served, or that increase in capacity that we talked about, will I have? And what is the value of each additional client or visit? So for example, if I'm thinking about hiring another practitioner into a brick and mortar business or a mobile business, and I say, they want to make $60 an hour or $60 per patient visit. And I'm going to have, so there's my $60, and let's just call it, I don't know, something like an extra 15% for taxes, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm doing the math, which, by the way, I'll give you my calculator for this at the end. We'll send it out on the replay link. And I have some other additional overhead, like software or insurance for them, right? What are all those costs? Versus how much can they bring me? If they're full, how many patients could they see and at what hourly reimbursement rate, right? So there's my total potential revenue. And then I'm simply asking the question of, okay, if they can bring me 100,000 of revenue, and in this case, they would cost me $25,000, for example, then my profit would be 75,000, right? So I'm looking at that. Then I'm asking myself, well, what's my margin? So for profit margin, if my face is out of the way, let's Let's move faces. Profit margin, really simply, profit divided by revenue. Sorry, profit over profit divided by revenue. So if we have our 75K of profit divided by our revenue here, here's our 75% profit margin. I like to think about it in the inverse, which I would call cost margin. So cost margin is what do they cost me divided by revenue. So in this case, they cost me 25 out of my 100K. So they're 25% cost, right? It's the same math, just inverse. And so then I like to go look at, well, what are those ideal cost margins? Now, it is really hard for most healthcare practices or healthcare providers to be in this less than 20% range. That's hard. It's workable for a lot of businesses to be in this 20 to 40% cost margin, meaning you're making somewhere around a 3x multiple on your team member that you're hiring. It is, I said here, unacceptable, even though I'll say for some businesses right now with where wages are at, we have to be in the low 40s. I just really don't like to, right? And there are some businesses where the model is just such, it's like, oh, I cannot do anything less than like 50%. Okay, here's what I don't want for you. I don't want you to think, and I had this happen. I had a provider come to us once, business owner, and say, yeah, I have someone, they were a healthcare provider. I have someone treating patients. We just do a 75-25 split. And I was like, that sounds great. Like, yep, I just love making 25% off everything they do. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. You give them 75%? They're like, yeah. It's like, interesting. Talk to me about your costs. Do they do all their own marketing? Do they do all their own sales? Do they cover overhead? I'm like, no, I do all the marketing. I actually do all the sales and I cover their overhead. It's like, let's look at this. When we looked at the numbers, this beautiful 75-25 split where they thought they were just making money for every patient that person saw. When we looked at how many patients they were actually seeing versus the costs associated to acquire the patient and the overhead for the treatment space, they were actually losing money every single time that person saw a patient. So do you think that we had to change that structure just a little bit? Yes. So it's really important to know your cost margin here. Ideally, a lot of people will tell you, you want to make 4x on your employees. In many businesses, that's not very feasible. I like 3x ideally. And if we're eking up towards this cost margin of around 40%, it's like, all right, if you run a brick and mortar healthcare practice, I'll just tell you that reimbursement rates of 180 per visit end up making it much more feasible. And then if you run any different kind of business, we get into, how much can you afford? And in some businesses, you can do way less than 20%. So 3 R's of profitable hiring here. Number 1, reserves. Do I have reserves to cover this new hire? If we have no reserves and we're taking the bank account balance down to 0 every month, it is much harder to hire versus if we have 1 month of expenses in the bank, it becomes a lot easier. If we have our ideal, which is 3 months in the bank, no stress. It's just so easy. We grow at the speed of light. So build reserves in the business and it will make your hiring much less stressful. Number 2, ramp up time. I want you to look at each position in your business. There's something like, there's an admin role. There's probably some kind of direct production or provider. So we'll just say production or provider, someone who's actually coming in and doing the work with clients or patients or on fulfillment. And you might have a ramp up time of a month for someone that's admin. And by ramp up time, I mean, how long does it take for them to get proficient enough to actually be either actually buying back my time or making us money? Because we know it's like when your kids start tying their shoes by themselves, as we've been teaching our kids, there's a huge ramp up time where it's like, I would just do so much. It would be so much faster if I just did it for you. But there's like a 3 or 4 month ramp up time where they got to learn how to do it. And now they're proficient enough that it's worth my time not doing it, right? Because at the beginning, it's like, oh, it takes so much more time. So Tokes, you were mentioning, it's like, it's hard to train people. Yeah, it is. It takes more time at the beginning. And it probably takes a ramp up time of a month or 2, or maybe even 3 months as you're bringing in a new clinician. Now, if they're an experienced clinician, maybe it's shorter, but you've got to figure out what is that ramp up time? And do I have that salary sitting in reserves so that I can absorb that cost? Otherwise, what happens is people think, I need to go higher and all the profit margins make sense, Alex. You already told me that they make sense, but I don't have anything in reserve. So I'm going to go do it anyway. And then we get into a spot where we can't make payroll. And now all of a sudden we're having to go get short-term debt. It's very expensive. And now all of a sudden this beautiful, profitable hire that Alex told you to do doesn't make any sense. So we have to figure out the ramp up time of that person before they're either buying back your time actually or becoming profitable. Cool. Next, ROI. We talked about this one. The ROI needs to make sense. I like a 3 to 4x multiple on whatever I'm spending. Cool. And we looked at those cost margins earlier. So I told you I'd only go 3 minutes over. Sweet. And then we'll do some Q&A here for a minute. But if you want help dialing in your financial knowledge on this stuff, really getting your profitability at a spot where it makes sense for you to keep running the business how you are, or maybe you're already profitable and you're like, I just need to have better systems around how I'm moving money, how I'm treating money. And that's what we do in CEO Finance Academy. We got this cool process that we take people through, we call the certainty path, where we're looking at 3 different things in the business. Number 1, we're coming up with the clarity piece of what's actually happening so that we can have a calibrated cash plan, or in other words, a personalized plan for what do you need to be doing in your business? What are the numbers in your business? We're going through books together. We're going through your how much you're actually spending. We're going through what you need to be making. We're going through taxes. We're looking at the assets that you've got and planning for how much cash do I need to have where. We're looking at your margins together, getting a real sense of what does the business need to produce in order for you to take home what you need. Folks did an awesome video on Instagram a couple of weeks ago talking about that. We appreciated that. Second piece is structure and getting things like the right bank account set up, making sure that your financial team is tuned up. If you have an accountant and a bookkeeper, but you don't know how to talk to them, that's a problem. And then finally, we create some stellar dashboards for tracking this stuff on a monthly basis. And then we get into the processes. What are the processes on a weekly, a monthly, and a quarterly cadence that we need to do to make sure that you stay up on top of your finances? And ultimately, I want you to hand this stuff off. But how can you hand something off if you have no clue what's going on with it in the first place? And then we strategically hit each of these 3 focuses throughout this program to make sure that you feel like, number 1, you own the financial outcomes in your business. Number 2, you have the structure in place to be able to coordinate well with the team members that you need, and you've got the processes so that it can keep running itself long after we're working together. So if you want this and you're like, ooh, this sounds good, and maybe I just want to see if this is even a fit, I'll drop a link here below. And if you're watching on the replay, go visit this link. Book a 15-minute call. You'll be talking with Scott, the guy who built and sold his $3 million business. And we'll be looking at where do you need to focus in your profitability next? Maybe you've got a specific hire. You're like, yeah, I'm trying to decide if I should do this or not. We're not going to be able to get to an incredibly deep dive answer on a 15-minute call, but we can get to what should you be focusing on next? And if it makes sense to work with us one-on-one, we can talk through what that looks like on a follow-up call. But this first 15 minutes, like, hey, let's sit down. We got nothing to sell you on this call. We'll just see what's the next focus. If we play a part in that, great. And if not, we'll point you in the direction that makes the most sense. All right. I was only 6 minutes over. This was previously an hour presentation, and you can tell I like to go fast. So I want to give you a minute to ask any questions that you want on this, on the hiring side. Anything at all about what we just talked through, I'm here for it for the next couple minutes. I'm going to bring Scott on, who's actually, he and I are supposed to sit down and review sales stuff right now. What's up, Scott? We'll bring you on in just a minute, man. We're just finishing up the workshop. But questions on any of this stuff? Kevin, Lindsay, Simona, NeuroAxis, Tokes, AP, Adam, any questions on this stuff? What you got?
No question. I'll just say this has been super, super helpful. This is exactly where we're at and the solution we're looking for and trying to figure out scaling effectively. So thank you.
You got it. You should sit down and talk with Scott, and we can point you towards something very specific. It's like, hey, this is what you need next. Grab a call on his calendar over the next week. And,
yes.
And we've got a bunch of trainings and resources that we've been putting out. So if nothing else, we can point you towards the next one that would be a fit.
Awesome. Thank you.
You got it. Any other questions from today? And if not, I just want to know, what was your biggest takeaway? Will you just put it in the chat? Like, what was the thing that you spent a half hour here? Your time is really valuable as a business owner. What's the takeaway for you from today that you want to remember going forward, or that was most useful for you from today? Capacity versus demand. Yeah. That's my favorite. It's literally my favorite thing, period. And figuring out bottlenecks is the most fun piece of the business. Took says reserves before hiring anyone. Yeah. or cheap financing, which we didn't get into that today. In some cases, some business owners can go the financing route. I just see too many people lean into debt without a good enough understanding of their numbers. And you know that you go to every debt provider out there and they're like, oh, debt's going to help you grow your business. It's like, this is not good for you if you don't have a handle on the rest of it. Reemphasis of cleaning our plates of our low value activities. Yeah, it's so fun. Guys, can I just tell you how fun it is to bring team members on board who actually like doing the things you hate doing? Can I just shout out for a minute to Natasha, who's on our team? She's been with us for about a year, just kind of ramped up to full time a couple of weeks ago. And we have discovered that, first of all, she's just like a productivity beast. This is incredible. We're like, hey, I've got this thing over the next week I'd like you to do. And 2 hours later, she's like, it's done. What's next? Like, my goodness. We found her on a website called onlinejobs.ph. She's based in the Philippines. And I will just tell you, I don't know how we survived without her for so long, because she's doing stuff for us now that's like, oh, whenever we have a workshop, which we're doing weekly workshops right now, and I can tell you we would not be able to have a cadence of new weekly workshops every week without her. And I tell you this to say, hire people who can take the things off your plate that are not at your highest level zone of genius. Because it is not my highest level zone of genius to build a landing page so that you guys can sign up for this. It's not at my highest level of genius to go grab the replay and email it out to everyone. It's not at my highest zone of genius to send out responses when people request to have the replay link. But it is in my zone of genius to set up a template so that someone else can fill in the blanks. And it is in my zone of genius to decide what we're going to talk on and then present on that. And then she does literally everything else. And it is so fun. And she is so excited about it. So fun to empower others to do the things that are not at the top of your zone of genius that you might even dislike and someone else might love doing. All right. Thank you all so much. What was that website? Onlinejobs.ph. Onlinejobs.ph. It's kind of like a jobs board for the Philippines. There's a guy who's actually here in Utah. John Jonas is his name, who created this, where he saw, hey, there's a lot of people that are incredibly hardworking, loyal, and with a favorable exchange rate that are excited to work for you in the Philippines. How can we connect them easily with you? And so we've used that for a number of our hires, and it's been great. Okay, y'all. Thank you so much. This has been another Friday Lunch and Learn. Next week, same time, same place. We're cranking out like 10 of these in a row, which is intense for me. However, hopefully really useful for you. And if this was great, hop on Scott's calendar and let's see if there's something else we can do together. Cool. Thank you all so much. Catch you next week. Bye.